This is the Dave Pamah Show, a global breakdown of how public systems actually work under pressure and why the same failures show up in different places around the world. I'm Dave Pamah, a retired firefighter, and this is where lived experience meets system reality. Today we're talking about Belfast. Not simply about violence, not simply about immigration, not simply about crime. We're talking about what happens when pressure builds inside a community, trust in institutions begins to weaken, and events that appear isolated suddenly trigger something much bigger. Because if you've worked on the front line for long enough, you learn something important. The thing that finally explodes is really the thing that caused the explosion. And that's where I want to start today. Because on the surface, many people will look at the scenes from Belfast and see one story. Some will see criminality, some will see racism, some will see community anger, some will see political failure. But underneath all those headlines sits a much bigger question. How does a society reach a point where hundreds of people are willing to take to the streets, cover their faces, throw bricks, set fires and target homes? Because those events don't emerge from nowhere. They emerge from pressure. And pressure is what we're going to talk about today. Now, before we go any further, let's be absolutely clear about something. Families were targeted. Homes were attacked. People were frightened. Children were frightened. Individuals were targeted because of who they were perceived to be. That reality cannot be ignored. Whatever concerns people may have about immigration, public services, housing, crime or community change, attacking families is not a solution. It creates more victims, it creates more trauma, and it creates even more pressure on already strained systems. But if we stop the conversation there, we also miss the wider picture. Because what we're seeing in Belfast is not unique to Belfast. We've seen similar patterns in England. We've seen them in France. We've seen them in Sweden. We've seen them in Germany. We've seen them in the United States. And we've seen them in Canada. Different countries, different governments, different cultures. Yet somehow the same tensions keep appearing. That tells us something important. This is not simply about one city. This is about systems under strain. So let's look at what actually happened. The immediate trigger was a knife attack. A man was arrested. Reports identified him as a Sudanese asylum seeker. Within hours, the focus of a public discussion moved beyond the individual incident and onto wider concerns around immigration. Then the situation escalated. Violence spread. Property was damaged. Vehicles were burned. Homes were attacked. People believed to be immigrants or from minority communities became targets. People believed to be that also fear spread, and the fear spread rapidly through affected neighbourhoods. And once fear enters the picture, rational discussion becomes much harder. That's something every emergency worker understands. Fear changes behaviour. Fear changes judgment. Fear accelerates rumours. Fear spreads faster than facts. When I worked as a firefighter, we saw this repeatedly. People often think emergencies are about flames. They're not. They're about human behaviour under pressure. The fire is often only the easy part. Managing panic is the difficult part. Managing uncertainty is the difficult part. Managing fear is the difficult part. And that's true whether you're dealing with a house fire, a flood, a major accident, or civil disorder. Once people stop believing that systems are functioning properly, they'd be looking elsewhere for answers. And that's where things become dangerous. Because confidence is one of the most important resources any society has. You can see it. You can't see it really. You can't measure it easily, but everything depends on it. Confidence in policing, confidence in the housing system, confidence in immigration systems, confidence in courts, confidence in political leadership, confidence in public services. When confidence starts failing, pressure starts rising, and eventually pressure finds an outlet. Now here's what many people don't see. The violence itself is often the final stage of a much longer process. Long before a brick is thrown, people have often spent years feeling unheard. Long before a bus is burned, communities may feel ignored. Long before disorder appears, there may already be concerns about housing shortages, school places, healthcare access, antisocial behaviour, employment opportunities, or community changes. Again, this doesn't justify violence, but understanding is different from justification. If we don't understand pressure, we can't reduce pressure. And if we can't reduce pressure, these cycles repeat. That brings us to immigration. Because immigration discussions have become increasingly difficult across many countries. Often people feel they must choose between two extreme positions. Either immigration is entirely positive or immigration is entirely negative. Real life is really that simple. Most frontline workers know reality sits somewhere in the middle. Communities can benefit enormously from migration. Healthcare systems depend upon migrant workers. Social care depends on migrant workers. Businesses depend on migrant workers. Entire sectors would struggle without them. At the same time, rapid population growth creates additional demands on housing, schools, transports, and healthcare. Both things can be true simultaneously. The problem begins when governments fail to explain clearly how systems will cope with those pressures. People become anxious when they see change. They become even more anxious when they don't understand how that change is being managed. And anxiety creates opportunities for division. Now, let's talk about something that receives far less attention. Capacity. Because capacity is one of the biggest challenges facing modern societies. Housing capacity, school capacity, healthcare capacity, infrastructure capacity. Population changes can be managed successfully when capacity grows alongside demands. Problems emerge when demands grows faster than systems can adapt. Then residents feel pressure. New arrivals feel pressure. Public services feel pressure. And frontline staff becomes trapped in the middle. I've seen that pattern repeatedly throughout my career. the public often blames the visible person in front of them, the firefighter, the police officer, the nurse, the teacher, the social worker. But the real issue usually started much further upstream. A decision made years earlier. A policy not implemented. Investment delayed. Planning failures ignored. Capacity not increased. By the time frontline workers encounter the problem, they're dealing with consequences rather than causes. And that's exactly why episodes like Belfast matter. Because they reveal pressures that have been building for a long time. The riots are visible. The pressure behind them is often invisible. Now let's zoom out globally. Because the same pattern appears across multiple countries. Housing shortages, cost of living pressure, public service strain, population movement, political polarisation, declining trust in institutions. None of these issues exist in isolation. They interact with each other. They amplify each other. And eventually, they create conditions where communities become increasingly fragile. The lesson here is not that Belfast is uniquely broken. The lesson is that Belfast reflects challenges many societies are facing right now. When systems are strong, the community absorbs the shock. When systems are weak, shock spreads. And that distinction matters enormously. As someone who spent years responding to emergencies, I learned that resilience is built long before a crisis arrived. You don't build resilience during emergency. You build it beforehand. The same is true for societies. Trust is built beforehand. Community relationships are built beforehand. Effective services are built beforehand. Strong institutions are built beforehand. And when those foundations weaken, every future crisis becomes harder to manage. So where do we go from here? First, violence must be rejected. Communities cannot solve complex social challenges through intimidation or attacks on innocent people. Second, governments must address legitimate concerns openly and honestly. Avoiding difficult conversations doesn't remove the problems. It often makes them worse. And third, public confidence matters. People need to believe that systems are functioning fairly, consistently and effectively. Without confidence, pressure accumulates. And finally, we need to recognise that these issues are really local. They're part of a wider patterns appearing across multiple countries. Different places, different cultures, different political systems, yet remarkably similar pressures. That's why Belfast matters beyond Belfast. It's another reminder that societies don't suddenly become divided. Pressure builds gradually. Trust erodes gradually. Confidence declines gradually. And then one event acts as a spark. The real lesson isn't about the spark. It's about the conditions that allowed the spark to spread. Because whether it's a fire, a public service failure, civil disorder, or political tension, the same principle applies. If we only focus on the visible event, we miss the underlying system. And if we miss the system, we'll keep repeating the same mistakes. Because whether it's here or anywhere else in the world, once you understand how these systems operate under pressure, you start to see the same patterns everywhere. This is the Dave Pamah Show.